So you may have heard the phrase, our beliefs shape our reality. Is this just spiritual nonsense, or is it something that is undeniably true? When I was a kid, I believed that making money was hard. Because my parents knew everything, and if they had trouble making money, then it must be hard. I grew up in Canada, and I went to a performing arts high school, where I sang in the choirs and I performed in the musicals and plays. And I had a dream of traveling the world one day, and I really wanted to go to Japan. But as I approached the end of high school, I was bound by my fear of making money. I would have loved to be an actor, but who could ever make money doing that? Luckily, I did have a skill that I knew would pay the bills, and that was computers. So I studied computer science, and I became a web and mobile app developer. And I was happy. I was getting paid to do something I loved. But my dreams of becoming an actor fell to the wayside. Also in high school, I met a cute blonde girl at the age of 16 who became my wife at the age of 21. And she was a nurse, and I would often pick her up from the hospital after her night shifts. So one morning, I pick her up and she hops in the car and says, I want to study a master's degree in Australia. And I was shocked. That's insane. How are we going to afford it? But she had spent her night shift with a nurse who had studied in Australia, and it sounded like a glorious and magical place. Beautiful beaches, beautiful people, the weather, the lifestyle. And although it seemed scary, it did seem like a good opportunity to travel the world like I'd always dreamed of. But then we thought, if we're leaving the country anyway, why don't we go backpacking first? But fear started to show its face again. Wouldn't it be dangerous? What if we ran out of money? How would we explain this gap in our CVs? But I learned a powerful concept from a book that has stuck with me to this day. The worst case scenario is rarely as bad as you imagine. We had degrees, we had savings, we could end the trip early if we needed to. It would take a lot of things to go wrong for us to be living on the streets. So we started to believe that this trip was actually possible, and we decided to go backpacking for 6 months before arriving in Australia. We explored the Machu Picchu, found wildlife in the Galapagos Islands, and climbed mountains in Patagonia. We explored castles in France and rode camels in Morocco. And I finally fulfilled my childhood dream of going to Japan. It was an incredible adventure I will never forget. We arrived in Australia, and we found an apartment in Manly overlooking the ferry terminal. And I found a job as an app developer in just 2 weeks. We traveled all over the country, and we spent our weekends wining and dining, lying on the beach, and making new friends. It felt like the tropical holidays that Canadians had always dreamed of had become our everyday life. So much for all that worrying. At the end of my wife's studies, we applied for permanent residency. But we thought, in the meantime, why don't we live nomadically for a while? So we spent the next 2 years living out of our backpacks, roaming from country to country. And we wanted people to know that you don't need to be rich to travel the world. So we decided to start a travel blog called Thrifty Nomads. See more of the world for less. So every morning, I would do some web development work, my wife would write some blog posts, and we spent the rest of the day exploring. And the blog was a project of passion. There was no business model. But we believed that we had something important to share, and over time, the money would find its way to us. So one evening, we were in a tiny island in Okinawa, which is a tropical region in the south of Japan. And we noticed a big travel blogger had shared one of our articles on Twitter. First it had 10 retweets, then it had 100 retweets, and then 100 more. And for the first time ever, thousands and thousands of visitors were hitting our tiny travel blog. So in a panic, I threw some banner advertisements on the blog, and we started to see our first ever trickle of money come in. Then I got in touch with the flight and hotel booking websites that we were mentioning in the article, and we made a deal that every time somebody clicked one of the links in our articles and made a purchase on the site, we would get a commission, also known as affiliate marketing. Suddenly, we had a business model, and we repeated the formula for the next year, and a few years later, we had a 6-figure business in our hands. I couldn't believe it. We were getting paid to travel the world. We had no employees, and we could take time off whenever we wanted. And all of this happened because we believed it was possible. A few years later, COVID came along and changed everything. Travel came to a standstill, our business got destroyed, and sadly, so did our marriage. My wife and I parted ways in 2020, and we stepped away from the travel blog. I was a single adult male for the first time in my life, at the age of 31. This was both terrifying and exciting. And part of this process was catching up on a lot of the dating and partying that my friends had done in their 20s. And this was a lot of fun, but eventually I felt like it was getting out of hand. So I decided to see a hypnotherapist who helped me realize that the reason I didn't care about partying so much was because there was nothing else in my life that I was passionate about. And he asked me, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I said, well, I always wanted to be an actor. But I can't do that because it's too competitive, it's too late to get started, and once again, I'll never make enough money. And he systematically argued through all of those beliefs with me. We made a monthly budget, and we thought of some work I could do on the side to pay the bills. We talked about all the other actors that got their start in their 30s. And I left that session now believing that I could be an actor. And once my beliefs were in line with my desires, I began to manifest my dreams. I had a photographer friend take my first headshots, and a videographer friend cast me in a children's series, which became the first item in my show reel. I started applying for extras work online, and through that, my agent found me and started casting me for major Hollywood productions, like The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling. Since then, I've starred in commercials, corporate videos, streaming series, and just recently I had my first lines on a real network TV show on ABC. But the impact that this hypnotherapist had really stuck with me. I walked in with no direction in my life. I walked out believing I could be an actor. If I could change my beliefs to change my career, what else could I change in my life? So I decided to enroll for some acting classes at Sydney Acting Studio. And although it may seem like acting is just playing pretend, it's actually about being as genuine as possible. And what's the best way to act out a scene genuinely? By believing it. My acting classes became the training grounds for my new experiment. So one week, I had a scene from Crazy Stupid Love, which features Ryan Gosling. And in this scene, he's hitting on a woman and approaching her very smoothly with his Gosling charm at a bar. And I really struggled with this scene. And my acting teacher told me that I sounded creepy because I wasn't saying the lines with confidence. And I asked myself, why is that? And the truth was, I had never approached a woman at a bar like that in my life. I thought I would be creepy. I didn't want to bug her. But if Ryan Gosling could get away with it, then why couldn't I? So that weekend, I was at my friend's birthday party and I spotted a gorgeous woman from across the room. And my first thought was, she is way out of my league. But remembering my challenge, I thought, well, why is that true? I'm interesting, I'm charming, why wouldn't she want to talk to me? So I decided to strike up a conversation, and it turns out we had a lot in common. We both were deeply spiritual, and we both loved to work in film. And after a night of drinking and dancing, she told me she was tired and she was going to go home. And thinking that there was no way that this would ever work, I said sheepishly, well, you could stay at my place. And she said yes. I couldn't believe it. Maybe I was a smooth guy after all. So I went back to my acting class, I did the scene again, and I nailed it. Smoother than Gosling. I had another scene from a film called A Few Good Men, where I played Colonel Jessup, a hardened military officer demanding respect from a hotshot lawyer investigating him for war crimes. And I struggled with this scene too. I had been a lifelong people pleaser. Did I really believe that I could demand respect out of somebody like that? There had been a production company that had recently screwed me over on a payment for an acting gig that I did. And my usual course of action would be to just back down and let it slide. Why would they bother paying me? But I challenged that belief too. I did my job fair and square. Why shouldn't I get paid? So I put together all the documents needed to take them to the court. I submitted it to them, and I said, if you don't pay me within 48 hours, I'm going to go through with it. The payment arrived. Maybe I was worthy of respect after all. I went back to my class, did the scene again, and I did it with a newfound sense of authority. My hidden superpower is that I have the ability to change my beliefs to get the outcome I desire. And the good news is, all of you have this power too. So if you have a dream left unfulfilled, ask yourself why. Is there a voice telling you that you're going to fail? Have you started believing that you're not good enough? Listen to those voices, but challenge them. Because the only authority on what's true and what isn't is you. And once you begin to change your beliefs, you will be amazed at the ways in which abundance will find its way to you. Thank you.